Kind of how far we get today, one of my points may end up being part of next week's class instead. So as we look at really the Sermon on the Mount, we see the continual flow of Jesus' teaching from these kind of character aspects, the priorities that we need to establish and set in our lives. And then really as we look into this chapter 7, it's all about actions. It's all about those who are in the kingdom and in doing. And I think as we look at today, it's not just about doing things, but it is the doing of things that then should have a transformative aspect to what our lives are and what our lives mean. I think that's the key that I think we want to get. Then this morning I kind of titled, I went to lots of different places. I just put choices, because in many cases this is really a challenge to us to choose, and why and how and what we are doing. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 21, it says, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Jesus wants us to see and understand and act by having the right heart. Having the right heart changes then the way that we live. And that heart change causes us then to have the right actions. It's not the other way around, right? It's not we can just doing things for the sake of doing things is not what Jesus is after. He's after a change, a transformation. As we've talked about this over and over, he's asking us to be different. And that may be kind of where we were versus where we're going versus where we are versus the world. There is a difference that Jesus is wanting us to be. And I think we're going to really see that come into focus in this section of verses that we're at today. So let's pick up in verse 12. ESV says, "So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets." Right? We call that, right, in the world today, we call that the golden rule. And it's interesting. I was thinking of this, and I thought this would be kind of like a 2-minute talk about it, and we'll kind of just move on and kind of get to the next spot. And the more I dug into this, there's a lot here, a ton here. In the New American Standard, it says, "In everything, therefore, treat people the same way you want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets." It's interesting that there are many commentators that kind of say, like, why is this right here? Why is this kind of seemingly interjected in the kind of the flow of the Sermon on the Mount? It doesn't necessarily fit if you just really look on it very, very surface. But it's interesting. You see that this law and prophets, if we think about the last time Jesus talked about that, used that same phrase, the law and the prophets, and we think about the encapsulation of what has happened between verses, I think it's 5:17, all the way to here, there's a lot. So one of the commentators says, "So the golden rule summarizes the essence of God's will for his people in the Old Testament and now for Jesus' disciples." Another one says, "Yet we cannot fail to observe the golden rule of 7:12 officially closes the teaching of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and summarizes the essence of the sermon." So if we think about it, what is Jesus saying here in the golden rule? What is he asking them to challenge themselves to do? Right? We see this kind of perspective shift. We see this idea of in everything you're doing, have this perspective of how is that affecting, how would I want somebody to treat me in that situation? How do I want someone else to respond to the way I am doing something? The first word there in the Greek, if you go to a Greek translation, it is panta, in everything. The language is emphatic. It says all, and it says when it's combined with that whatever, it's not just like all, it's like all encompassing all. It's reasonable to translate this in all things, or even the sum of the matter is this. Right? So we see this is really what Jesus has been about the whole time in the Sermon on the Mount, right? He's like, the first chapter is how to live as a disciple, the character aspects and the things and the ways that we should do. He then gets into these how we should apply the law, right? You have heard it said, but I say to you. This kind of like put the glasses on and the correction of like what you thought you were thinking, putting on the Jesus corrective lenses, but I say to you is this. Verses chapter 6 is how to live, though, before others, right? This is not about putting it on a show and making a big thing so others can see you, about being truly dedicated and living our lives to benefit others, not to make a big show about ourselves. And the end of the chapter really gets into putting our trust in God and letting the anxieties of worry about the world and the stuff, and there's going to be stuff to worry about, right? There's always going to be stuff to worry about. Turn on the news, and it's like, ugh. And then we get in chapter 7, it's really how to treat people, how to live with others. So this summary of the entire message, the essence of what we see is in everything, therefore, love others. Treat them like you would want to be treated. And it's a huge challenge. It's a huge, right, departure from those that would be hearing that, how they might be living their lives. They were less concerned about others than they were concerned about doing the things that they thought, oh, this is what I need to do because I'm right. In doing in their rightness, many times they were wrong. So we see really, let's turn over to Matthew chapter 22. We see a similar right language when Jesus is asked, what's the most crucial thing? Matthew chapter 22, let's pick up in verse 34. And this question to test Jesus, all right, what's the most important thing? Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus simplifies it all, right? The whole of the teachings in the Old Testament, he summarizes it into two really buckets. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all of the law and the prophets. And so we see in that, right, loving God and loving others. I think this principle is really illustrated really well for us if I get here going, there we go. Let's look at the parable of the Good Samaritan. Turn over to Luke chapter 10. So we see the same kind of question being answered, right? Or asked. Behold, the lawyer stood up to put into the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said to them, What is written in the law, and how do you read it? He said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. So he got the answer right. He's like, Jesus said, and he said to them, You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But he, this questioner, desiring to justify himself to Jesus, well, who is my neighbor? And really what he's asking is like, how can I fence this question, this neighbor question in so tight that it's so easy for me to fulfill that objective? Instead of being inclusive and reaching out and seeing a spot where I really should be loving others, he wants to love others in the nice little tight package that he can control and feel good with. So Jesus provides this parable. A man who was going down to Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers and stripped and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. So we see this is really how the world typically works, right? Take or be taken. And this kind of like this world is out to satisfy itself. We see this person who is seeing a person that's vulnerable, and this kind of aspect of this iron rule of might makes right. I'm bigger, stronger. I'm going to take what I can take. And we see that then he took him and left him for dead. But then we see two people that had the opportunity to act, and he didn't. So now by chance a priest was going down by the road, and he saw him, and he passed by the other side. And so likewise a Levite, when he came out to the place and saw him, he passed on the other side. This passive rule, a priest and Levite I didn't do it. I'm not guilty. I didn't take his stuff. I didn't rob him. I didn't leave him for dead. But unfortunately, they kind of did leave him for dead. Right? This idea of, well, it's not my fault. I'm not going to worry about it. It's not the attitude that Jesus is expecting. And then we see kind of really this true picture of the golden rule. When the Samaritan, as he journeyed, he came to where he was. He saw him. He had compassion. He went to him. He bound up his wounds. He pouring oil and wine. He sat him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, took care of him. And the next day he took 2 denarii and gave to the innkeeper and said, Take care, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Jesus says, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the one who fell among the robbers? Right? We see he extended himself. He gave of his resources in a spot where, right, this road from Jerusalem to Jericho was notorious for this type of activity. If you go to like Google, you can see lots of images. It's also not a very hospitable place, right? It's lots of hills and dirt and twists and turns. It's not something that you want to like, all right, let me pause what I'm doing and focus on this one person. You want to be like, I don't need to be about I don't want to get this to happen to me. But we see the focus and really this idea of in all that we're doing, have the right attitude. How do you want others to treat you? the heart of a disciple needs to be about what can I do good to others. Maria?
I was going to say, I mean, if we're supposed to be representatives of the Lord, then we should be exhibiting His qualities. And we should be exhibiting those qualities not just to other Christians, but to, I think, all humans we come in contact with. And it doesn't mean that we don't use wisdom and we don't use discernment. But as you were speaking this whole time, it just made me think back. This is like dating myself, but going back, I think it was like the 90s when Bill Cosby's son was murdered. And they had shown a picture on TV of him wearing this shirt that said, "Hello, friend." And they were talking about like just what a nice young man he was, and you know, just how when he approached people, he approached them with that type of position, that type of attitude that, you know, yeah, we're strangers, but yet you're a fellow human, you know, and I'm going to see you as a friend until proven otherwise. And it's not that you take the kindness for weakness, but just this approach of just extending goodwill towards other men and not, you know, and helping out where you can and putting yourself out there where you can, because again, look what the Lord has done for us.
Right.
And it can't be this they against us mentality. It doesn't work. And trust me, if you knew how my mind works, it's typically, you can ask my sisters and my family, it's typically very black and white, very cut and dry. So for me to make a statement like that, you know, I mean, but that's been my experience the older I get, is that you have to look at each situation, look at each person, and really have more of a holistic view. And not just jump to conclusions, not just, you know, think, oh, well, that person's so-and-so, so they're no good. You know, let's just get rid of them.
I think that the perspective shift is, it's Jesus is saying this is more than just don't be mean to others. This is initiate kindness. It's a call to action. It's a call to not just sit on the sidelines like the priest and the Levite did, right? They had, if you look at like, did they have every excuse not to act? Yeah. There's lots of reasons why, hey, they're going to violate some cleanliness law. They're going to not be able to do what their job was supposed to be. They're putting themselves at risk if they were going to act. But Jesus says, act. Initiate kindness, not just sit on the sidelines. And I think the perspective that we need to challenge ourselves to think is, do I want forgiveness? Do I want affirmation? Do I want somebody to listen to me? Do I want somebody to be tolerant of me? Do I want somebody to give me the benefit of the doubt? Lisa?
I think it's the active goodness instead of passive avoidance. You know, when you're washing people's feet, that's dirty work.
Right. Right. So in this statement, whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. It's a pretty powerful statement. And by Jesus putting it into this context, right? He's like, and oh, by the way, this is the culmination of what God has been planning and teaching and telling us for hundreds of years. This is part of the law and the prophet. This is the summation. This is the completion. This is the next phase of this go and speak to others that I'm asking you as disciples who want to be a part of this new kingdom, what I want you to do and what I want you to think. Let's turn over to Romans chapter 13, another kind of couple spots I want to call to attention on this. Paul is saying to them, owe no one anything except to love each other. For one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you should not commit adultery, you should not murder, you should not steal, you should not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word: you should love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. We see a couple other spots in Galatians chapter 5. It says, through love, serve one another. Again, this is a call to act, not a call to be passive and wait. Any other thoughts as we go ahead, Ian?
If you love God, first one, if you love God, then you will love everybody else.
Absolutely. I think it is a challenge, though, that we need to, if we are truly following God, right? I think it's an easy thing to say that. But what Jesus is saying, go do it. Show me. And I think we're going to see this as we think about then, as we think the next few things. That's kind of why I talked about choices, right? Jesus then begins a series of contrasts. We see two different paths, two different trees, two different kinds of disciples, and then that two different kinds of disciples is probably going to end up in next week, and it's going to end with two types of foundations. There's these contrasts of make a choice. Are you going to truly follow the law and the prophets in loving God, and the harder one, loving others? Or are you going to follow your own path? So Jesus is saying, it's time to make a choice. Let's pick back up in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 13. Enter by the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. So as the Sermon on the Mount is closing up, we see Jesus is saying it's time to make a choice. Are you going to be with me? Are you going to be on my team, or are you going to kind of choose the way that's easier and nicer and pleasant? Are you part of the kingdom, or are you going to be part of this broad way that leads to destruction? If you rewind it, right? Where is your treasure? We go all the way back to chapter 5. And where is your treasure? Because where your treasure, where are you putting your value in your life, in your things, in your stuff, in your family, is where your heart is. So we see this distinction, right? We see these two gates, these two roads, these two destinations. The narrow gate is hard to enter. The narrow gate is one where boundaries are clearly marked. You have to stay inside the lines. If you're outside the lines, you're not on the narrow way. And oh, by the way, the narrow way is not the one that's the most popular. The narrow way is hard. But the narrow way is the where that leads to where we want to go. It's interesting as we think about why is that narrow way so hard, and we see Satan's toolbox is at work on that narrow way, right? We see persecution. We see in several different places where we can look at Satan persecuting us. Back in chapter 5 and verse I don't think I put the right verse there. But we see that Satan continues to to focus in on God's people and those that are following this narrow way. In John chapter 15 and verse 20, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecute me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my words, they will also keep yours. And so this idea of this persecution, this idea of the narrow way is going to be hard. This narrow way is going to be one that we need to look towards. But I think what I want us to focus on, though, is God has always demanded a choice. Let's look back into Deuteronomy chapter 30. It's kind of this recounting of the old law and the commitment and the contract that God has with his people. See that I've set today life and good and death and evil. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you today by loving the Lord your God, by walking in his ways and keeping his commandments and his statutes and his rules, then you shall live and multiply. And the Lord will bless you in the land you are entering to take possession of it. But if your heart turns away and you will not hear and are drawn away to worship other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you will surely perish and you will not live long in the land that you are going and over Jordan and enter and possess. And so we see this choice where God is saying, make a choice to live as I have asked you to, and you'll be blessed. In Joshua, right, as we kind of get into this go time, right, they're in the land, they're doing the things. Joshua is coming to the end of his life. He's like, make a choice. Choose for you this day whom you will serve. Psalm chapter 1 is this contrast of the way of the righteous versus the way of the wicked. And David, in so doing, it's like you can see the blessings that come from walking in the path of the righteous. In Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 12, it says, there's a way that seems right to man, but its end is the way of death. And Jesus is really describing this, right? He's like the wide way. There's plenty of room for everything you feel like doing. There's no curbs, there's no boundaries, there's no rules. It's not hard to walk on that road. And guess what? There's a lot of people walking with you. You feel included. But we see then this way ends in destruction. I think what Jesus is emphasizing here is there's not the easy pass where you can hop on and get in the HOV lane and it's like there's walls and there's kind of like it just goes and smooth, and you're either on the really hard path or you're on the 4-lane interstate. There's no middle ground. There's not a place where we can say, I want a little bit of what I want and I want a little bit of God. I think that's what the world around us would start to say, is like, you can have this and you can compartmentalize this and be you, be you. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. Acts chapter 4 and verse 12, there is salvation in no one else. For there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. Discipleship is different. The majority of people are not on the path towards life. That's a hard thing to say. It also says, hey, we've got a big job to do ourselves in helping people understand this, that the wide way is not where we need them to stay. The narrow gate really is one that is represented by obedience, first and foremost, right? The idea that there are boundaries, there are guardrails. You need to stay inside the lines. And oh, by the way, that's not going to be popular when you kind of make those distinctions. It's one of sacrifice. Galatians 2 and verse 20 says, it's not I who live, but Christ who lives in me. We can see that one who is on the narrow pathway must sacrifice and submit to God. And not just on the surface. I think what this is really calling us to do is there is a deep change that must take place in our lives. And a deep way of living that must be established if we are truly going to be on this narrow way. Any other thoughts as we kind of, Ryan?
I think about a lot of the way that Christianity is viewed today more or less as just a moral philosophy. But I think this sets Jesus apart from all of those other philosophers or moral teachers or gurus, in that he doesn't just impart wisdom and say, okay, do what you wish with this, but actually has an expectation of changing. And so in a weird way, it's almost an apologetic argument that Christianity is the real deal, because the one who gives the instruction, as the crowd will say later, is someone who teaches with authority, because he actually demands something from the crowd, from the listeners, rather than just giving wisdom and you can do what you wish with it.
Right.
Yeah, I was reflecting on the two simple things that Jesus says here on loving God and loving others. And, I know there's a lot of money spent in corporate America to find a vision for a company. And generally, if you do it right, it's something that you may never achieve, but you're always striving for it. And even when you do achieve it, it doesn't go away, because you have to continue to maintain it if you're going to, because generally it sets a big precedent. And I think here, if you look back, you got the 10 Commandments, you got over 600 laws of the old law, and he really boils all of it down into two simple things. And I've had people say, if you really have a good vision at the end of the day, it should be something that could fit on your hand, that you could always remember, and really be simple, and be a calling that you wake up to every day. And he does that here. And he boils all this down to two simple things: love God, love each other. That's it.
Right.
It's pretty amazing.
And the guidance, right? You can find guidance in those two statements in everything. Every step of every day, every what if kind of, sort of, it's found there. Dave?
And we're not restricted by how others react to that. If they're our enemies, we can still love them and pray for them. If they're good, we can love them all the more. If they are actively against us, we don't have to respond in the way that the world would. We can simply, again, respond as God would, sending the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous, caring for them all.
Yeah. Absolutely. The next section is really, now what? Right? It's starts off, right? Beware of false prophets. That's the other kind of big warning, I think, that we see here, right? Throughout scriptures, we are warned that there are those who are going to lead us astray. So I put into Chat GPT, is like, where are all the passages of warnings of false teachers? And it popped out for me like 3 pages of stuff. All the way back from, right, Deuteronomy and false prophets. And we see there's a chunk, especially in the prophets, right, in Jeremiah and Isaiah, like this warning, too, of the leadership of the people who have the right credentials, right? They are put in levels of authority, declaring themselves to be somewhat leaders religiously. But if you're trying to inspect a little deeper, they are living to their own desires, not living to God's desires, right? We see that in the epistles too, right? There we can see that there are going to be people that use division as a way to infiltrate God's people and to break them down and to make a spot where, guess what? If they're divided, it's harder for you to withstand them. I think that's something. And I think one of the things that's going to be the biggest thing is people that kind of like blur the lines of right and wrong. Yeah. That's what God's word says. But let's not be so exacting in those words. This is probably what he really meant. Or that was something that the first century culturally said like this, but we are advanced now. And we're in 2025, and we can see things much clearer. Right? We see this description of false prophets. We see their sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravaging wolves. And then Jesus says, like, how are we going to know right from wrong? Right? This idea of this sheep's clothing, they appear to be harmless, or maybe even spiritually sound. But inwardly, what does it say they are? Ravenous wolves. They are destructive. They are willing to kill and be taken and do the things that they want, right? I think this is where I think the warning to us is, what do we need to be watchful for? What do we need to be on the lookout for? Let's look over really quickly into Acts chapter 20. In this section, Paul is speaking to the Ephesian elders and kind of give them some warning signs to be watchful of and what's going on. And in verse 20, let's just go all the way down to 28. Pay careful attention to yourselves and to all of the flock, in which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers through the care for the church of God, which he obtained with his own blood. I know that after my departure, fierce wolves will come among you, not sparing the flock. And from among your own selves will arise men speaking twisted things to draw away the disciples after them, right? We see this warning for these wolves that are going to be amongst you, calling for the Ephesian elders to be strong. In Ephesians chapter 4, we can see a little bit of that, right? It's like, don't be tossed to and fro by all these winds of doctrine. The antidote to that is to be diligent and be studying and to be mature and to be working so that you can see these winds of doctrine and not be shaken up by all the waves. And then we see in Colossians chapter 2, we see what this also looks like, right? This philosophy, empty deceit, human traditions. These are things that really kind of start to really come focus. And what Jesus is saying here, I'll build this all out, hopefully. How are we going to know? How are we going to know what this? And Jesus says, you'll know them by their fruit, right? Their fruit is what is truly within. Their doctrine, their character, their influence. What is the outcome? What is what are they teaching versus what the standard is? Right? In 1 John and in 2 Timothy, we can see, right, our standard, and we need to go back to the standard, the Word of God. And then we need to evaluate more than maybe what they are saying on the surface. But I think what Jesus is saying, what truly comes out, right? The fruit is something that is revealed, maybe not right at first, but it's something that will come out in the end. We see then, in Galatians chapter 5, this kind of distinction, right? This is the fruit of their life enmity and strife and jealousy and fits of anger or rivalries, dissensions, or is it the fruit of the Spirit? It's interesting as we are to be inspecting these fruit, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be something that's like, is that a wolf or is that a sheep? We need to be diligent. I think in 2 Timothy, we can see that Paul is telling Timothy this is something that he needs to be always on the lookout for. Okay?
I saw one in Acts 13 where Paul was on his first missionary journey, and there was the Jewish false prophet named Bar Jesus, and when they were seeking to hear what Barnabas and Saul, what Paul had to say, he was opposing them. Like you see, like a reject. No, don't listen to what they have to say. That's a pretty obvious sign of somebody who's going to be a false teacher. No, don't listen to them. Just listen to me. Why would we not want people to seek out and hear everything? Okay, I need to hear what you have to say. So that seems like an obvious choice.
Right. Yeah. As we finish up this, I think the one thing that how we're going to do this is it's not something that is easily done. It takes diligence. And I think what we go look in the James passage there, it takes what James calls biblical wisdom. It takes wisdom to understand what is this person truly saying. It's hard to tell a wolf from a sheep because guess what? They look like a sheep. They got a disguise on. But as we look at them a little bit further, what is their fruit? What is their tree producing? Is the person producing ungodliness and division? Or are they producing sound truth and faith and love and godliness? So we're gonna hold the next section, right? This idea of kind of those that kind of are saying a lot, but not really necessarily doing a lot. And then you see the doing part in the foundation. But I think as we kind of close this morning, one of the things I wanted us to look at is what does it mean to truly live these attributes? Is Jesus doesn't want us just to be admirers of his will. He wants us to be actively doing those things, engaged and being doers from the heart, right? We need the understanding from God, though, to help us to discern truth from error, to help us to walk the narrow pathway, and to bear fruit that truly honors Christ. So we'll finish up next week with kind of a little bit of a summation, but truly kind of what does it mean to build our house on the rock? What does true discipleship really mean? It's not a lot of just kind of saying. It's putting our faith to work and to living a life pleasing to God. Thank you so much for your time today.